For 20 years, a man's disappearance haunted the wind-swept plains outside Cody, Wyoming. His wife told investigators he simply walked into the wilderness one morning and never came back. Search teams combed the mountains. Dogs tracked his scent until it vanished into thin air. Helicopters swept the canyons. Nothing. The case went cold. But his daughter refused to accept that her father had simply disappeared. Every single year she returned to those mountains, searching, hoping, refusing to let him be forgotten. Then one day, while going through her father's old belongings, she discovered something that everyone had overlooked. One small detail buried in the evidence that investigators had dismissed years earlier. That single detail would crack the case wide open and expose a truth so devastating that no one saw it coming. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment and let me know where you are watching from today. And if cases like this keep you coming back, hit that subscribe button and tap the bell so you never miss another investigation from Archives of Crime. Now let me take you back to where it all began. July in Cody, Wyoming, brings a particular kind of light. Dry, harsh. The high mountain sun spilling down over silver-gray grasslands and dusty, weather-beaten hills. On that morning, Jonas Walker rose earlier than usual. He brewed a cup of black coffee, pulled on his worn leather gloves, grabbed his sun-faded wide-brimmed hat, and stepped out onto the red dirt yard in front of his small ranch. His dog, Rusty, a long-legged, rust-colored hound, circled him excitedly. The two of them were heading out to check the fence line along the edge of Shoshone National Forest. Routine work. Nothing out of the ordinary. The sky stretched impossibly clear overhead. Wind whistled through distant pines like a faint warning only the mountains could hear. Around 8 that morning, a neighbor named Hank Rowe spotted Jonas walking the familiar trail from the ranch toward the forest. Rusty trotted ahead, tail wagging happily. The sight was so ordinary that Hank thought nothing of it. He raised a hand in greeting. Jonas nodded back. It would be the last time anyone ever saw Jonas Walker alive. By noon, the sun hung high and hot. Elise Walker, Jonas's wife, stepped onto the porch and looked toward the trail where her husband usually appeared when heading home for lunch. Nothing. No footsteps crunching on gravel. No barking from Rusty. No dust rising in the distance. She walked the property. The horse barn, the hay shed, the old tool shed where Jonas kept his gear. Everything sat unnaturally quiet. By early afternoon, worry had taken root. Jonas never stayed out this long without checking in. He had taken only basic tools, no food, no water, no radio, no phone. Elise called Hank. He had not seen Jonas return by any alternate route. She called 2 more neighbors along the trail. Same answer. Nobody had seen him since morning. As late afternoon slipped away and the sky turned pale orange, worry became panic. The sun dropped behind the Absaroka Range. Darkness from the Shoshone forest spilled outward, fast and cold. Elise stood on the porch, watching the trail disappear into shadow. And finally, just before 8 that evening, after more than 12 hours with no word from her husband, she picked up the phone and called the Park County Sheriff's Office. At first light the following morning, additional resources were brought in. A seasoned tracker experienced in reading sign in the Cody area forests led a patrol back to the last faint footprints recorded at the forest edge. In the gravelly soil right at the trail's edge, the tracker discovered something unusual. A series of footprints that stopped unnaturally. Deep compression at the toe of the boot prints, but absolutely no continuation forward, as if the walker had abruptly halted or been forced to stop. Adjacent to these prints was a small area of lightly disturbed dirt. Not a trail. Just a patch that looked like minor impact from weight. The soil structure did not suggest Jonas had stood there long. It was more likely he lost balance or was pulled in another direction. While the team analyzed the footprint area, another deputy discovered fresh tire tracks that did not match Jonas's truck in size or tread pattern. These tracks veered off northeast, entering the forest at an angle locals rarely used for access. The presence of unfamiliar tire tracks near the spot where Jonas's footprints abruptly ended raised immediate red flags. The search radius was expanded from 3 miles to 8 miles, covering secondary trails, dry gullies, and thinly wooded areas. Searchers split into 3 groups. K-9 units focused on the area around the sudden stop footprints. The mounted team swept secondary trails. A ground team followed the unknown tire tracks. During the expanded search, one deputy found an empty .38 caliber casing beneath an old pine tree roughly a mile from the footprint site. A preliminary check showed it was not heavily rusted, but it was impossible to confirm whether it was connected to Jonas or simply left by a hunter. The casing was logged as evidence, but classified as connection undetermined. By late afternoon, with the sheriff's search map nearly covered in red, checked-off grids, command reached a tentative conclusion. There was no evidence Jonas had voluntarily walked away from the initial area along natural roads. No extended scent trail, no new footprints, no scraps of clothing or other items. Jonas's disappearance showed no signs of someone who got injured and kept walking farther away. It was far more likely that some external factor had completely interrupted his movement. Deputy Carl Hemsworth took the initial report. Elise's voice came through urgent and unsteady. In the background, wind whipped against the ranch's wooden walls. Carl asked the standard questions. What time did Jonas leave? What did he take with him? Any history of medical issues or unusual behavior? Elise answered in fragments, but the key details were recorded clearly. Jonas left around 8 in the morning. He carried fencing tools and nothing else. No backpack, no food, no water, no GPS. About 20 minutes later, a sheriff's SUV turned onto the dirt road leading to the Walker Ranch. Headlights swept across the dark yard where Elise stood with her arms crossed tightly, her face etched with strain. Deputies Hemsworth and Miller got out and immediately began processing the scene. They checked the porch, the front yard, the horse barn, the storage sheds. Nothing suggested Jonas had returned at any point during the day. They examined his bedroom, his small office, his personal storage areas. Wallet? Still there. Watch? On the nightstand. Truck keys? Hanging by the door. Medication? Untouched. Everything was exactly where it should be. A detail that strongly suggested Jonas had no intention of being gone long. Word spread quickly through the tight-knit cowboy community around Cody. Within an hour, 3 pickup trucks belonging to Jonas's friends had arrived at the gate. Hank Rowe, Kate and Bill Harmon, members of the cowboy shooting club Jonas and Elise belonged to. They brought flashlights, ropes, and headlamps. The sheriff set up a staging point right in the ranch yard. They would conduct a limited night search while the trail was still relatively fresh. Using flashlights, deputies examined the path Jonas had taken. Lightly disturbed dirt and rocks suggested a man and dog had headed out that morning, but there were no signs of return. The K-9 tracking unit arrived close to 11, with 2 dogs trained to follow human scent in forested mountain environments. Jonas's scent was collected from a jacket in the bedroom and an old pair of work boots. The dogs worked hard. Strong prairie winds made the scent trail difficult to follow. Results confirmed Jonas had been on the trail that morning, but offered no indication of where he went afterward. a mounted team was deployed in the opposite direction, sticking to trails Jonas normally used when going deeper into the forest. These were local cowboys who knew the terrain inside out. They checked secondary deer trails, high-risk spots with exposed roots, slick rocky sections, small crevices that could hide a person if they fell. Nothing. Overhead, a Wyoming air rescue helicopter flew the main trail routes, sweeping high-powered spotlights across slopes and openings between dense clusters of pine. Still nothing. Then came the first piece of physical evidence. While the K-9 team expanded eastward, one deputy spotted a small object lying right at the edge of the trail. A worn, brown leather work glove, the exact kind Jonas used when repairing fences. The glove had fresh dirt on it. No heavy weathering or sun fading. It had likely been dropped not long before Jonas went missing. Deputies marked the location, photographed it, collected soil samples, and carefully bagged it for analysis. The canines were given the glove's scent. But the investigation shifted to reviewing Jonas's personal and financial situation. The first step was requesting bank records for the previous 3 months. What investigators found painted a troubling picture. Jonas's finances were far from stable. Income from seasonal horse training and fence repair had dropped sharply. Ranch operating costs were higher than expected. A prior year equipment loan remained partially unpaid. In the most recent 2 months, many essential payments were made under Elise's name rather than Jonas's, even though Jonas had previously handled them directly. Access and control belonged primarily to Elise. Jonas had only limited access and typically used a small debit card for personal expenses. There were no unusual transactions suggesting Jonas was preparing for a long trip. No purchases of camping gear, extra food, fuel, or anything related to leaving ranch life behind. Then investigators reviewed Jonas's communications and discovered something significant. For more than a month before the disappearance, Jonas had stopped corresponding with his daughter Emily via letters or email. Emily confirmed she had tried repeatedly to reach her father. Letters sent to the ranch went unanswered. Emails to the couple's shared address received no reply. When Emily spoke to Jonas directly by phone in June, he only said things are a bit messy and quickly ended the call. Based on the email records and Emily's account, investigators noted a strong possibility. Elise was controlling or filtering all communication between Jonas and his daughter. This raised questions about how much agency Jonas actually had in recent decisions. Investigators broadened the witness list within the community. The focus turned to activity the night before Jonas disappeared. The 3 closest households were questioned again. All 3 reported hearing unusual sounds from the ranch area on the evening of July 16th, only hours before Jonas left the house the next morning. One neighbor to the south heard intermittent arguing around 8 that evening, mostly a woman's voice, not clearly enough to make out words. Another household to the west mentioned Rusty barking furiously for about 10 minutes, out of character for the normally calm dog. The sound reports were logged, though exact timing could not be pinned down to the minute. A deputy was sent to the gas station on the highway out of the area. The morning shift clerk confirmed seeing Elise alone around 7:30, buying coffee and a few small items. This was before the time Elise claimed Jonas had left the ranch to check fences. The time discrepancy between Elise's statement and confirmed witness sightings created a clear inconsistency. Jonas and Elise did not leave the house at the same time as Elise had described. A clerk at a small convenience store recalled Elise stopping in to buy 2 sandwiches around 10 in the morning, a time when Elise said she was at home waiting for Jonas. Another neighbor who was leading horses out to pasture saw Elise drive away from the ranch a little after 9. Yet Elise never mentioned leaving during that window. When these timelines were laid side by side, the sheriff began to see a pattern. Every witness placed Elise leaving the ranch multiple times that morning, while Elise's statement portrayed her as simply staying home, waiting for Jonas to return. This was not the kind of contradiction that stems from faulty memory. It reflected significant inconsistency. Investigators took one critical step back to thoroughly re-examine everything that happened the evening before Jonas disappeared. Jonas's call records showed he made only 2 calls on July 16th, a short one to the supply store just before 4 in the afternoon, and a longer one lasting over 8 minutes to Emily at 7:42 that evening. This was the last call Jonas ever made, before he vanished. Emily provided details of the conversation. Jonas asked about her studies and job change plans. His voice sounded normal, but became slightly hesitant toward the end. Emily remembered the largest search operation since Jonas was reported missing was launched. Resources were bolstered by Park County Search and Rescue, Wyoming State SAR, and a volunteer horseback team from neighboring ranches. The K-9 unit reswept the area near the trail. The horseback team pushed into side trails and steep, hard-to-reach terrain. The ground team handled open forest and flat clearings. The helicopter conducted aerial sweeps along Shoshone Canyon. After 6 continuous hours, all 4 teams had found nothing new. No discarded clothing, no fresh slide marks on rock, no metal objects glinting in the sun, and especially no sign of Rusty. By late afternoon, more than 2/3 of the search map was marked complete. The entire canyon, including side ravines and deep gorges, had been thoroughly covered with no trace of Jonas. In the end-of-day assessment, the sheriff wrote a clear interim conclusion. There was no evidence Jonas was still alive within the searched area, nor any trace supporting the idea that he had voluntarily left the region. Over the next 3 months, no reports or statements emerged that were credible enough to expand the investigation. Routine checks around the ranch yielded nothing. During this period, Elise announced her decision to sell the Walker Ranch. She cited inability to run it alone and a desire to leave an area tied to too much stress. Property transfer records showed the ranch sold for significantly less than its prior valuation. After the sale closed, Elise packed up and moved to Casper, a larger city more than 3 hours from Cody. The move violated no laws. But the fact that Elise left Cody as soon as the investigation stalled was noted by the sheriff as a point of interest in the file. With no new tips, no fresh evidence, and no additional witnesses, Park County had to take the next procedural step. The case was moved to cold case status. Jonas Walker's file was sealed, renumbered, and transferred to the cold case section. As the folder was closed, no one on the investigation team could have known that this silence would last not just months or years, but more than a decade. From the moment Jonas's disappearance was officially designated a cold case, Emily refused to let her father's file fade into oblivion. Every year around mid-July, the anniversary of his disappearance, she returned to Cody to organize an independent search. These efforts began with just Emily and a few close friends, but gradually became known to the local cowboy community who joined in. Emily prepared maps, checklists of areas to cover, and flyers with Jonas's identifying information, even though she knew the chances of finding her father after so many years were slim. The small search parties she coordinated started at the edge of Shoshone National Forest, pushing deeper along little-known trails, checking minor ravines, dry creek beds, and areas the original SAR teams had missed due to manpower limits. She repeated this relentlessly every summer, despite Wyoming's harsh weather, strong prairie winds, and loose, slippery soil. Over the years, scattered sightings of Jonas were reported in neighboring Montana. One came from a small town south of Billings, where someone claimed to have seen a man strongly resembling Jonas in a local diner. Emily immediately drove to Montana with photos of her father, but diner staff confirmed the man was just a stranger who looked similar. Another report originated in Livingston, where a witness thought he saw Jonas near a truck stop. Local police checked security footage and descriptions, but found nothing connected to Jonas. Every sighting ended in a dead end, yet Emily documented every detail as a potential, however faint, lead. The false leads and wasted trips never discouraged her. The family-led and cowboy community searches ensured Jonas's disappearance did not fade away. Every summer, his case was mentioned on community bulletin boards, in small-town coffee shops, and at cowboy gatherings as an unsolved story. Emily's persistence and the community's support kept Jonas's memory alive and unintentionally created a widespread information network, preventing the case from falling into complete silence. In 2010, nearly 5 years after Jonas vanished, the Wyoming Division of Criminal Investigation conducted a statewide review of cold cases, including Jonas Walker's. A DCI team began by analyzing the entire file: search area maps, SAR reports, witness statements, phone records, financial and communication notes, all collected physical evidence. During the review, they identified approximately 11 significant inconsistencies between Elise's statements and those of neighbors, the gas station attendant, and objective carrier timing data. The discrepancies involved when Jonas left the house, when Elise left the ranch the next morning, whether she left the ranch that night, her description of Jonas's activities that day, and whether she heard arguing or rusty barking. The inconsistencies were deemed substantial enough to question the accuracy of her account, but not sufficient to prove criminal conduct. DCI recognized a key point. Many evidence items from 2005 had never been deeply analyzed because forensic technology was limited at the time. Soil on gloves, fabric fibers, faint boot prints, wood samples from fence posts, even the .38 casing. All were candidates for future retesting as DNA and microanalysis technology advanced. Every piece of evidence was moved to the State Forensic Storage Facility, recatalogued under modern standards, and preserved in optimal conditions for potential future testing. DCI did not open a criminal investigation, but they officially placed the case in the priority long-term monitoring category, ready to reactivate upon new technology or information. In early fall of 2014, nearly 9 years after Jonas disappeared, DCI received an unexpected report. A local hunter named Walter Briggs discovered a metal object while tracking deer in the hills east of Shoshone National Forest. The location was more than 7 miles from the last place Jonas was seen, far beyond the original search perimeter. The item was an old rusted cowboy spur that had nevertheless retained its original shape. It was wedged between 2 large boulders, with its rowel caught in the roots of an old pine tree. Walter took the item to the Park County Sheriff's Office, where it was forwarded to DCI for verification. When investigators compared the spur to the list of Jonas's personal belongings in the file, they immediately recognized the match. Jonas owned a distinctive pair of spurs with hand-engraved patterning along the metal edges. One of them had a small dent on the side that was documented in his property description. The spur Walter found had that exact dent, as well as the characteristic antique screw style Jonas used to order from a cowboy supply store in Billings. DCI classified the spur as the first significant piece of physical evidence to surface since Jonas went missing. The next step was to precisely locate the discovery site. Walter led investigators back to the spot, which lay in a steep northeast-facing rock field, an area rarely visited because of treacherous terrain filled with deep crevices between tilted slabs. This was territory the original SIR teams had never reached. At the scene, DCI observed no recent disturbance. The spur appeared to have lain there for years, partially covered by pine needles and accumulated sand. Yet its location raised a critical question. Jonas could not have walked to this area under normal circumstances. The straight-line distance of more than 7 miles, combined with steep terrain and sections requiring scrambling over broken rock, made spontaneous travel there nearly impossible. DCI considered 2 possibilities. Either Jonas was taken to this area after he disappeared, or his belongings were carried there and dropped. Both scenarios supported the hypothesis that Jonas had been moved away from the ranch, a factor never considered in the original investigation. In early summer of 2015, another report surfaced. 3 young Wyoming hikers exploring a little-known side drainage of the 7-Mile Gulch area discovered a large rectangular silver-gray object wedged between 2 boulders and partially covered by dirt and rock. After brushing away the layer of dry leaves and dust on top, they realized it was a locked metal toolbox. The box was quite heavy and showed no serious rust, suggesting it had been somewhat protected from the elements despite clear signs of having been outdoors for years. DCI sent an evidence recovery team to the scene. The toolbox was thoroughly examined before being opened. Inside were 3 notable items: a dark blue wool jacket worn at the cuffs, a topographic map of the Shoshone Canyon area with old creases, and a gas card in Jonas Walker's name that showed signs of having been swiped through a reader. The jacket was immediately confirmed by Emily when photos were sent to her. It was the one Jonas regularly wore on colder-than-usual workdays. The map was even more significant because it had the familiar creases exactly how Jonas used to fold maps before putting them in his truck or toolbox. But the most striking item was the gas card. When DCI checked the transaction records tied to the card, they discovered it had been used at a Cody gas station exactly 1 day after Jonas was reported missing. The transaction data confirmed it was performed by physically swiping the card at the pump. But there was no evidence Jonas had ever been there. This instantly raised major suspicion. If the card was used after Jonas disappeared, who took it to the gas station? And why did the card end up inside a toolbox hidden in a rock crevice nearly 10 miles from where Jonas vanished? DCI examined the exact location where the toolbox was found. The crevice lay off any established hiking trail. Reaching it required navigating several difficult steep sections, but when a tracker carefully assessed the terrain, he noted a crucial detail. Although the hikers found the box in a rugged spot, an off-road vehicle trail ran directly above the discovery site, only about 70 meters upslope. DCI concluded the toolbox had been pushed down from above, rather than carried into the crevice on foot. The scene showed the box had fallen several meters based on a dent in the lower right corner and scrape marks where metal contacted rock. This supported the conclusion that the box was transported by vehicle to the nearby point and then shoved down the... Elise was brought in for a new interview, this time at DCI headquarters rather than the Cody Sheriff's Office. During the session, Elise maintained that Jonas left the house alone and that she never used any of his belongings after he disappeared. However, when asked about the gas card transaction that occurred after the disappearance, Elise said she did not remember and that maybe Jonas used the card and left it somewhere before the day he went missing. That response was immediately flagged as inconsistent. Bank records showed that post-disappearance transaction was the only one ever made on the card after Jonas vanished. And more importantly, Elise had never previously mentioned Jonas losing his gas card. When DCI laid out the transaction time and location alongside a map of travel routes, Elise became flustered and changed her story. She said she might have found the card in the house and might have used it while forgetting it belonged to Jonas. This directly contradicted her original statement that she never left the ranch the day Jonas disappeared and never used any of his property after he left. When pressed further about the possibility that the toolbox was delivered to the site by vehicle, Elise denied any involvement, but could offer no plausible explanation for how Jonas's jacket and map ended up inside the box. For the first time since 2005, the case file contained signs that Jonas's disappearance did not happen as Elise described, and may have involved deliberate concealment of evidence. DCI moved into an intensive forensic analysis phase. The first step was soil analysis on the jacket found inside the toolbox. Experts sampled dirt from the cuff and back areas, then compared it to soil samples from the site where the cowboy spur had been found. Results showed significant mineral composition matches, including the ratio of mica and distinctive gravel found in the thin soil layer on the northeast-facing slopes of 7 Mile Gulch. This confirmed Jonas's jacket had been in direct contact with the ground near the spur location, an area far from the ranch, and not on any trail Jonas normally used. Next, the forensic lab examined loose fibers from the jacket sleeves and hips. Under a microscope, the fibers did not show clean cuts or natural fraying from ordinary abrasion. Instead, they displayed characteristics of having been yanked by strong external force, uneven fiber separation, surface scoring. These signs indicated the jacket experienced tension or violent pulling rather than simple wear from roots or rocks. DCI's preliminary assessment was that the jacket may have been forcibly tugged or subjected to unusual stress. Investigators clarified the gas card usage log to identify who used the card after Jonas disappeared. DCI requested security camera footage from the gas station, but it had been purged on the normal retention cycle. However, bank and point-of-sale transaction logs were still available, and confirmed the purchase was made by physically swiping the card. The system recorded the terminal ID, transaction time, and the clerk on duty. The morning shift clerk was interviewed. While she had no memory of the customer's face, she confirmed that physical card transactions at that time required a signature. When DCI compared the signature on the retained receipt copy to Jonas's known bank signature samples, it did not match, but it bore clear similarities to Elise's signature on the ranch sale documents from 2005. Although not legally conclusive, then came the testimony that changed everything. In early 2017, an elderly resident who had once lived near the Walker Ranch contacted DCI through the cold case tip line. His name was Harold Kenny. When investigators met Harold at the nursing home where he now lived, he appeared lucid despite being over 80. His memory had slowed with age, but his recollection of that night was clear. Harold stated that on the night of July 16, 2005, he was in his backyard more than half a mile from the Walker Ranch, checking the water tank because the pump was making a strange noise. It was close to midnight. The sky was pitch black, with only faint moonlight filtering through the trees. In the quiet, he heard the sound of a truck engine starting in the direction of the Walker Ranch. Because sound carries easily in that terrain, Harold was familiar with the distinctive engine noises of his neighbors' vehicles. He was certain the sound he heard belonged to the mid-size pickup that Elise usually drove, not Jonas's larger truck. The engine ran quieter, more evenly. It had the characteristic sound of an older Ford Ranger. What caught Harold's attention was not the fact that Elise was driving late at night. He had occasionally seen her return late after trips to town. It was the direction she turned. Harold described that when the truck left the ranch, its headlights illuminated the dust on the road for a few seconds before it headed down the narrow dirt road leading into the forest to the east. A route Jonas often used to take horses out or check the land, but that Elise rarely took alone. As Harold listened to the sound of the truck moving farther away toward the trail outside the forest, he stood there for a few more minutes and noticed a second unusual thing. There were no headlights coming back. Normally, if Elise was going to town, she would turn the opposite way onto the main road. But that night, the truck went into complete darkness and disappeared. Harold did not want to get involved in another family's affairs. He assumed it was the Walkers' private business. But when he heard about the spur discovery in 2014 and the toolbox in 2015, the memory of that night connected in his mind. He finally realized what he had witnessed might have value for the investigation. DCI listened carefully to Harold's statement and recorded every detail. The time, near midnight. The engine sound matching Elise's truck. The direction the truck left the ranch, toward the forested area instead of toward town. And the absence of any sign of the truck returning. The timing of Harold hearing Elise drive away from the ranch near midnight on July 16th matched the gap in Elise's own statement when she claimed she just stayed home watching television that evening. Harold's description of the route Elise took matched the exact direction that aligned with both the spur discovery location and the toolbox site. For the first time in 12 years, DCI had eyewitness evidence that Elise was moving at the critical time along a route directly connected to the evidence locations and completely contrary to her statements over the years. DCI began reconstructing an official timeline of Jonas Walker's disappearance. The first time in 12 years, the file contained enough information to create a coherent, evidence-based sequence of events. The timeline reconstruction started by placing Elise's statements alongside objective data sources. Elise maintained that on the evening of July 16th, she and Jonas had dinner. Then Jonas went to the barn while she stayed inside the house until bedtime, never leaving the ranch. No argument occurring. However, data collected from 2005 to 2017 showed the opposite. Witnesses heard arguing and Rusty barking aggressively between approximately 8 and 8:20 that evening. Jonas's final phone call to Emily at 7:42 ended abruptly when he said he had to deal with something. Jonas's phone went dead immediately afterward. And most importantly, Harold's statement confirmed Elise drove away from the ranch near midnight. DCI established the first event frame. An argument took place on the evening of July 16th inside the ranch, lasting roughly 20 to 30 minutes and likely escalating to a confrontation that left Jonas unconscious or unable to move himself. The next portion of the timeline was built from forensic evidence related to the evidence locations. The spur was found more than 7 miles from the ranch, in an area not normally accessible on foot. The jacket bore soil matching the spur location and showed signs of being dragged forcefully. The toolbox containing Jonas's items appeared in a rock crevice near the same area with soil samples and dents consistent with being pushed from the off-road area above. DCI reached a key conclusion. Jonas's belongings were moved away from the ranch during the night or early morning hours after he disappeared. The evidence locations lay along the exact route described by witness Harold as the direction Elise's truck traveled that night. Combined with the data showing the gas card was used on the morning of July 17th in Cody, DCI determined that Elise was in town far earlier than her years-old statements indicated. and at a time when Jonas was no longer capable of making the transaction himself. This reinforced that Elise was directly involved in handling Jonas's property and belongings after the incident on the evening of July 16th. DCI reconstructed the probable event model, a prolonged argument inside the ranch, possibly stemming from financial stress, control over Jonas's contact with Emily, or disagreements about the ranch's situation. After the argument, Jonas was rendered unconscious or injured in a way that prevented him from leaving the ranch on his own. Because no blood was found inside the house or yard, DCI concluded the incident that incapacitated Jonas occurred in an area that would not leave obvious traces, possibly in the barn or near the porch where the ground is hard, and traces could easily be obliterated by foot and animal traffic. Around midnight, once it was fully dark, Elise used her own pickup to leave the ranch, carrying Jonas's belongings and quite possibly his body. Harold's statement confirmed he saw Elise's truck head down the trail into the eastern forest, the exact route leading to the spur and toolbox discovery sites. Based on the terrain and the tire tracks matching the model Elise drove, DCI assessed that Elise drove to a point accessible by vehicle, then moved the evidence down into the rock crevice area via a short slope. The spur was found not far from the toolbox, suggesting items may have fallen out or been dragged apart while Elise was moving Jonas or handling his property. Investigators reconstructed the route Elise most likely took, leaving the ranch between approximately 11:30 and 11:45 that night, driving to the eastern dirt road intersection, turning onto the off-road trail, stopping near the area where the toolbox was later found. The toolbox's deep placement between two boulders suggested deliberate concealment, rather than accidental loss. DCI issued an official conclusion in the report submitted to the state level. Jonas's disappearance was inconsistent with a random accident or voluntary departure. Instead, every indicator pointed to human intervention that resulted in Jonas being removed from the ranch and his belongings deliberately scattered in the forested area. Based on the complete forensic data, witness statements, and reconstructed timeline, the Jonas Walker file was officially removed from cold case status and upgraded to criminal investigation. Suspected homicide. The first time in 12 years the case was treated as a criminal matter. The Wyoming DCI initiated the process of obtaining an arrest warrant for Elise Walker from the Natrona County District Court, where she was residing in the city of Casper. The warrant application included all forensic data related to soil on the jacket matching the spur location, forcefully dragged fibers, tire track analysis, and evidence of the gas card transaction used after Jonas disappeared. The statement from witness Harold Kenny, who confirmed Elise drove away from the ranch near midnight along the exact route to the evidence locations, was regarded as a factor strengthening the necessity of the warrant. DCI listed the charges as including kidnapping related to Jonas being removed from the ranch while unable to move himself, evidence tampering due to Elise deliberately moving and concealing evidence in the forested area, fraud based on the unauthorized use of Jonas's gas card, and finally, homicide in an indirect form based on the conclusion that Jonas died on the night of July 16th and Elise was directly involved in covering up the aftermath. After reviewing the file and assessing the risk level, the district judge approved the arrest warrant for Elise in early May 2017. As soon as the warrant was signed, DCI coordinated with the Casper Police Department to execute the arrest plan. A team of investigators discreetly approached the location where Elise was living, a small apartment near downtown Casper. They chose early morning when the area was quiet, and Elise typically left home late. When Elise opened her door and stepped into the common hallway, two agents approached, identified themselves, and read the arrest warrant according to procedure. Elise appeared completely shocked. She did not react strongly, but was visibly shaken when she heard the list of charges. She asked for specific reasons, but the agents only repeated that all grounds would be presented during interrogation, and that she had the right to remain silent and the right to an attorney under Wyoming law. Elise was handcuffed and led to the vehicle in silence. From Casper, she was transported directly to the DCI office in Cheyenne for processing and preparation for the initial interrogation. When the interrogation room door opened, the small space with its metal table, 3 chairs, and harsh white light created an immediate tension. Elise was brought in. Her handcuffs had been removed, but she still looked uneasy. Her eyes constantly darted toward the door, as if searching for an escape from a situation she could no longer control. The lead investigator began by fully informing Elise of her rights, then laid out the forensic file arranged in chronological order. First, photos of the spur found in 2014. Next, pictures of the toolbox discovered in 2015, along with the worn jacket and map. Then, the soil, fiber, and tire track analyses. And finally, the seamless timeline reconstructed from 7:42 on July 16th to the morning of July 17th. Elise stared at the documents without speaking, but the expression on her face showed her defenses gradually eroding. The investigators started with neutral questions about when Jonas left the house on the morning of July 17th, then gradually moved to contradictions in her earlier statements. Why did she claim she never left the ranch that night when witness Harold Kenny insisted he saw her truck heading toward the forest? Why did she say Jonas went to work on the fence when all the physical evidence showed he never went near that area on the day he disappeared? Why was her gas card used the very next day when she denied leaving the ranch early that morning? Elise tried to hold her ground by saying she did not remember, or got the times mixed up. But when the investigators produced the signed gas receipt and compared the handwriting to documents she signed when she sold the ranch, the similarities were too obvious. She began to lose her composure. The investigator increased the pressure by showing photos of the toolbox pushed down into the rock crevice. Something far too heavy for Jonas to have carried himself, placed next to images of tire tracks that matched the type of truck Elise used to drive. Elise stared at the photos for several long seconds, then turned away and put her hand to her forehead as if trying to avoid facing them. A moment later, when the investigator placed the map that had been found inside the toolbox on the table, Elise froze noticeably. It was the map Jonas always used, folded in the exact way only he ever folded it. The creases on the map were covered in a thin layer of dust, proving it had been in the 7 Mile Gulch area for years, a location Jonas could not have reached on his own. The investigators spoke very slowly, explaining that they had reconstructed Elise's entire route from the ranch to the off-road area using witness statements and forensic evidence. If she continued to deny everything, they would still proceed with prosecution based on the full body of evidence. Elise took a deep breath and leaned back in her chair, trembling slightly for a few seconds. When the investigator asked the key question, "Where is Jonas?" a long silence fell over the room. Elise did not answer immediately. Her hands clenched together, one shoulder hunched as if under invisible pressure. A few minutes later, she asked whether if she told everything, it would make things clearer. The investigator only replied that her cooperation would be noted, but made no promises. Elise lowered her head, and, in a small but clear voice, she gave the location where Jonas had been left. In 7 Mile Gulch, to the east, under the big ledge near the base of the slope, where there is an old fallen pine lying across. This was the first time in nearly 12 years they had a direct lead on the body's location. DCI immediately activated a specialized search team to conduct a recovery operation based on the new information. A crime scene unit, A forensic team and a K-9 unit were deployed from Cheyenne to 7 Mile Gulch. They used the topographic description provided by Elise and data from the toolbox discovery to pinpoint the target area. Once on site, the team followed the off-road track accessible by pickup, then continued on foot down a steep, rocky slope. One forensic team member recognized terrain features matching Elise's description. A large boulder offset to the left, with a natural depression beneath it, wide enough to conceal an object from view above. Under layers of pine needles, rock fragments, and dry soil, the search team uncovered dark fabric fragments consistent with denim jeans and the remains of work boots. Digging deeper, they soon found a human skeleton exhibiting weathering consistent with the time since Jonas disappeared. Still on the body were a deteriorated leather belt and a rotted wallet containing a distorted metal piece that appeared to be part of a belt buckle. Everything was collected and sealed according to protocol. The remains were lifted out using specialized equipment and transported to the lab in Cheyenne for examination. Subsequent forensic analysis confirmed the skeleton belonged to Jonas Walker based on dental records, bone measurements, and old injury markers documented in his medical file. The forensic examination also determined the cause of death was consistent with trauma from a fall from height. Multiple broken ribs, spinal injury, a shattered femur, all consistent with a fall onto hard rock at the bottom of the gulch. There was no evidence Jonas had walked to that location under his own power, further supporting that he had been moved there while incapacitated. The entire discovery was documented and added to the official case file, marking the first time since 2005 that Jonas Walker's disappearance had a definitive answer regarding his location and condition. After Jonas Walker's remains were positively identified and the cause of death clearly established, the Natrona County District Attorney's Office formally charged Elise Walker with kidnapping, evidence tampering, fraud, and indirect homicide based on her interference with the aftermath. Moving the body, concealing evidence, providing false statements repeatedly over more than a decade. The trial was held at Natrona County District Court in the fall of 2017 and drew intense local interest in Wyoming as the case had become one of the longest-running cold cases ever solved in the region. From the very first day, the courtroom was packed. Jonas's family, cowboy friends from Cody, Casper residents who had known Elise, cold case followers from across the state. The prosecution presented the full picture of the case in chronological order, starting with the night of July 16th and Jonas's final phone call to Emily, followed by the sounds of arguing and Rusty barking furiously that neighbors heard. Then the period when Elise left the ranch without Jonas, completely contradicting her original statement. The prosecution moved to the forensic evidence: soil on the jacket matching the spur location, fibers showing signs of being dragged, tire tracks consistent with the pickup Elise drove, and the toolbox buried deep in the crevice with dust samples indicating it was placed there very shortly after Jonas disappeared. The gas card transaction was a major highlight because it proved Elise actively used Jonas's assets immediately after the incident and lied about whether she left the ranch the next morning. When the prosecution displayed the signed receipt next to Elise's signature on the ranch sale documents, the similarity drew particular attention from the jury. A large portion of the trial was devoted to the timeline reconstructed by DCI. Argument between 8 and 8:20. Jonas's phone going dead right after the call to Emily. No evidence Jonas left the ranch on the morning of the 17th. Elise appearing at the gas station earlier than she claimed, and her truck being seen by a witness heading directly toward the route where both the spur and toolbox were later found. Witness Harold Kenny testified via pre-recorded video due to poor health. His statement that Elise left the ranch near midnight and Jonas was not in the truck became the crucial link tying the forensic puzzle to actual behavior. Although Elise maintained she had only tried to handle the situation and did not intend to harm Jonas, when the prosecutor asked why she never called police that night or the next morning, she offered no reasonable explanation. Defense counsel attempted to argue that Elise acted in panic and fear that Jonas had harmed himself. But the objective evidence, especially hiding the toolbox and Jonas's personal items in an inaccessible location, demonstrated deliberate, purposeful conduct rather than panic. As the trial moved to closing arguments, the prosecution emphasized that Elise's actions after Jonas's death were the legal focus. She did not seek help, did not report anything, did not attempt medical aid. Instead, she dragged Jonas's body to her truck, drove into the forest, hid evidence, and obstructed the investigation for 12 years. Under Wyoming law, this was sufficient to support all charge counts, regardless of how the initial incident occurred. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all 4 charges. At sentencing, the judge stated that the severity and duration of concealing the body and manipulating the investigation were aggravating factors. Elise received a sentence of 30 to 35 years in prison, with the possibility of parole considered only after serving the majority of the term. When the sentence was announced, a heavy silence fell over the courtroom. Emily, who had pursued the search for her father for 12 years, did not cry. She simply bowed her head and clenched her fists, as if finally setting down a burden she had carried for years. The cowboys who had been Jonas's friends, men who rode dozens of miles through mountains every year searching even when hope was gone, stood quietly in the back rows. They neither celebrated nor showed anger. They only felt the closing of a story that had dragged on far too long. A story they never thought would have a clear ending. After the trial, local Wyoming newspapers published detailed accounts of the investigation, highlighting the role of modern forensics, Emily's and the cowboy community's relentless effort, and the unexpected emergence of witness Harold Kenny as the key that unlocked everything. DCI officially closed the Jonas Walker case, transferring all files, evidence, and reports to state archives, ending an investigation that had spanned more than a decade. The Cody community and surrounding areas held a small memorial for Jonas, where Emily shared that the most important thing was not the sentence Elise received, but that her father had finally been found, and now had a place where the family could leave flowers every summer. The case has since become a prominent example of how cold cases can be solved, even after many years, and that family persistence, combined with forensic advances, can bring the truth back to light. No matter how much time has passed, the story of Jonas Walker's disappearance and its resolution after 12 years is not just a personal tragedy or a model criminal investigation. It also reflects some very real issues in contemporary American life: domestic violence, isolation in rural communities, and the importance of preserving data, forensics, and the perseverance of victims' families. The case highlights a troubling reality. Many missing persons cases in the United States originate from quiet family conflicts that are hidden out of fear, shame, or control by a partner. In this story, Elise isolated Jonas from his daughter Emily and controlled finances and personal contact. Classic signs of emotional abuse that experts repeatedly warn about. The practical lesson is clear. If someone is suddenly cut off from family or support networks, that is a red flag that cannot be ignored. The second lesson comes from the unrelenting efforts of Emily and the cowboy community. Their persistence not only kept the case alive in public memory, but also created pressure for law enforcement to keep reviewing the file. In real-life America, Many cold cases are solved only because families never stop advocating, organizing private searches, and maintaining public attention. Finally, the story demonstrates the critical role of modern forensics in the justice system. Tiny soil samples, dragged fibers, tire tracks, all became keys to unlocking the case. This sends a clear message. Investing in forensic science not only solves major crimes, but ensures justice for people who might otherwise be forgotten. In a country as vast as the United States, where police handle thousands of cases every year, diligently storing data, preserving evidence, and never overlooking small details are what ultimately allow cases like Jonas's to find the truth. Thank you for following this story of loss, yet also of incredible resilience all the way to the end. If you want to keep exploring cases where justice sometimes arrives late but never truly disappears, hit that subscribe button and tap the bell so you never miss the next investigation from Archives of Crime. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on this case. What stood out to you the most? See you in the next one.